beginning of 2020, our world was hit hard by COVID-19 crisis, right? So due to which both social and business terms were really impacted. Many changes were required, especially on the business front. Let's say from products that were used to services offered to ensure that there's business continuity. Yeah. So what we did, obviously people were asked to stay indoors. So employees couldn't get into offices. So that really meant most of the changes impacted IT operations. Yeah, so IT operations was one of the main business area which actually got impacted during COVID pandemic, including the corporate. Obviously, as part of IT operations, that included how corporate delivered IT services, and of course, the support capabilities, right? So what we did, for us to be able to gauge, exactly how these operations, how these IT operations have changed. In late 2021, we had this global IT service management survey, and we included somewhere around 440 IT professionals, in this survey, and majority of whom were from the US, India, Australia, Canada, South Africa, and the UK. So we did a survey, right, to ensure we exactly know what has changed since the pandemic began. So for us, the reason for us to be able to actually get that survey done is to identify how IT operations have impacted by the pandemic, and of course also find out the success factors, the influences within IT service management success, and how well IT personals, like people working within IT operations, how well they were perceived by other business functions or teams within other business departments. So that's one of the main reasons why we did now go through the survey, to know what's going on and how IT operations coped with the pandemic. Yeah. So some of the focal points that we would see today would be starting with work locations, right? Obviously, we will now talk about work locations and of course all of these points, but obviously these are all some of the major focal points that we will see today, right? So starting with work locations, the impact of employees working remotely, the financial and asset management implications, the business view of IT, security and governance issues, and of course, now how did we utilize third-party services, and of course, how did we utilize technologies to assist users within the organization. So these are all some of the focal points that we will discuss today. Yeah. So let's start with work locations. So the significant impact, right? So as part of work locations, the significant impact of the global pandemic was a change to corporate opinions on where work has to be done, right? So obviously, while work more often took place within an office pre-pandemic, it was not the case any longer, right? So people had to move their locations. People have to now change or shift, go to remote locations, and still continue to work, right? So amongst amongst the whole different group of organizations, what we did, come across based on the survey was the smallest organizations, right? So the smallest organizations, when we say smallest, we're talking about employees somewhere between 1 till 50, yeah? And the largest organizations, like we're talking about enterprise organizations, somewhere starting from, let's say, 5,000 plus employees, yeah? Were the more likely to allow employees to work at home. So there are several reasons for it, yeah? So let's say when we talk about the smallest organizations, obviously work has to continue, and people did not come to office, and they didn't really want to spend so much on the logistics and, of course, renting offices, renting buildings with no one in there, right? So it was easier for them to actually adapt and ask people to work at home and still provide, and of course, business continuity and services to those few small group of users or small group of employees that they had. At the same time, when it comes to large organizations, it was again more easy for them to adapt to that culture, just because most of the large organizations already did have tools and services and processes built in to cope up with people working at home and still offer business continuity and services to every employees, yeah? So when we take a look at how these work locations have been shifted, yeah? So what it really means is we need to replace what were band-aid. So earlier, remote work was still there, right? People did work remotely, but it was not a large portion of users who actually started working remotely. You could have small group of users who work remotely, who work from home, depending on the nature of the job, right? So this pandemic changed everything. Even within our office, right? So we did not really have a culture of work at home, right? Obviously, this pandemic changed everything, and we were forced to work from home and still provide and support our customers during this pandemic time. So obviously, what companies had earlier were like simple, quick fix solutions to ensure that users were able to work remotely, right? So those were like band-aids, as we have listed. So it was more quick fix solutions wherein people can still work remotely and of course perform their regular day-to-day job. But pandemic proved that's not going to actually work anymore, right? So we're going to need more robust services to ensure that we meet both organization resiliency and the needs of employees who actually do work at home, yeah? So let's take a look at the impact of employees working remotely. So we saw working locations have been changed. People started working from anywhere they were. So let's take a look at the impact. So the survey, right? The survey tells us, and again, this is the survey that we have done around 2022. Okay, so this is more of a latest survey. It tells us just 11% of the employees wanted to still work at home, right? So it was not a major group of employees who still wanted to continue to work at home. And apart from people who wanted to work at home, we also had a larger share of people, almost 50%, half of the organization users wanted to actually continue the hybrid concept. So wherein they wanted to work, say, a couple of days from the office, and they wanted to work a couple of days or 3 days from their home. So that was the large portion, right? So people wanted to still have the hybrid culture, need not completely wanted to work from home, and again, need not completely want to come into the office. as they were pre-pandemic. But again, this is a larger portion, right? So wherein people had now once, so obviously it was more of a mass migration of employees, right, who were actually working from office to let's say a remote work that were required. So as part of handling these IT operations and users, now IT personals working towards providing support services. Pre-pandemic, if you look at the types of requests or the types of issues or the types of services that were offered to the users, it was more related to the appropriate services or the critical issues that's been faced by users. If you could just relate, one of the most common problems users would raise would be a password reset problem. Yeah, so that kind of was one of the most common issues that was faced by the users. Yeah, so obviously considering all these pandemic scenarios, when we did survey IT professionals, managing IT asset was one of the key challenges that they had to face during the pandemic. So that was due to various and several reasons. So obviously, those assets were no longer connected within the network. So people had to take those assets with them for them to be able to continue to work. So managing those IT assets that were remote was one of the key challenges faced by IT professionals. And again, apart from just managing IT assets, communications and collaboration was the next challenge that they had to face. And of course, user training, satisfaction, all of that were there as part of the survey results as well. So when it comes to managing assets, right? So the way we look at managing assets remotely as part of, let's say, an IT service management tool is to ensure that we are able to cope with the hybrid work culture. So these IT professionals needed tools that can actually manage those remote assets, and of course still be able to provide appropriate services as and when the users required them. Yeah, and communication and collaboration was the very next challenge. So obviously, as we all know, during the pandemic, one of the tool that actually skyrocketed during pandemic was the remote assistance tool, right? So the one that we are actually using right now, in fact. And of course, apart from just remote assistance, it's all about people being able to communicate with their colleagues, with their mentors, with their leads, managers effectively to gain appropriate feedbacks and of course to continue the business. So these two were the most important challenge that were faced by IT professionals during the pandemic. So interestingly, one of the most significant change that we saw with regards to the challenges IT professionals did face was with regards to the security. Yeah, like trying to secure company and client data. So during 2020, so the challenges based on securing company and client data was somewhere around 36%. Yeah, and that actually dropped to 22% during 2022, which meant IT organizations have started investing in robust solutions which can actually enhance securing data, be it remote or be it in-house. So that was a satisfying result that we had, seeing something that actually increased in terms of the challenges that has to be faced day in, day out by IT professionals. Yeah. So the other thing that we did go through And it was really surprising, right? So even before pandemic, 40% of the organizations did not really have any policies defined based on BYOD. So obviously, organizations did not really worry about or did not really care about BYOD policies. That meant a lot to supporting people. And of course, they didn't really expect such a pandemic to happen either, right? So the smallest organizations, as well as the largest organizations, were more likely to find their BYOD policies held up during the pandemic as well. So of course, as we did discuss earlier, since we're talking about small group of users, we couldn't really kind of stop people using their personal devices for work-related activities, right? So that meant they had to implement BYOD policies so that they can users can still access and work using their own devices, but still have them secured to ensure that data and of course any client information doesn't really get violated. At the same time, the largest organizations, they already had policies and they already did provide assets and mobile devices so that users within large organizations, they could still utilize the company-owned assets and of course utilize their personal devices to be able to access the company data and of course the processes that's been implemented so far. So it was kind of key to organizations wherein they'll have to kind of adapt to BYOD, and it has become more of a must-have considering the pandemic situation, considering people working remotely, and of course, considering people who would already use their personal device for work. So let us take a look at how we did cope with assets and of course how we did cope with financial management and so on. Yeah. So before the crisis, only about 30% of the organizations were providing mobile capable devices or assets. So when we say mobile capable assets, we're talking about laptops, mobile devices, tablets, and so on. And we actually saw what happened during the pandemic. So again, we were one of the early adapters as a company. And of course, we've also seen customers who were early adapters, wherein they actually did provide laptops as their primary device rather than actually providing desktops. So the pain, the logistics, the pain of shipping a desktop or a larger device to end users' location was really huge during the pandemic. Yeah. And that was really felt by almost every sizable organization. And the pandemic changed that, right? So based on the survey, we came to know that an additional 47% of organizations are now providing mobile capable assets to their employees. So this was really an eye-opener for those organizations wherein they started procuring mobile capable assets rather than the old legacy workstations that were really desktops. Yeah. And of course, providing assets and providing mobile capable assets to users meant that we're going to have proper tools in place for us to be able to manage them effectively, for us to be able to make sure that those assets are secured, for us to ensure that the users are, nothing really goes wrong with those assets, be it a ransomware attack or be it anything, right, with regards to security and so on. So for us to be able to cope that, organizations had to start looking at applications, softwares, processes for them to be able to support those equipments remotely. So those assets are they were no longer connected to the network since people started working from home. And again, we are seeing more of a hybrid work as well. We still need to ensure that those assets are being secured and still being managed remotely. So most of the organizations, almost 80%, already had the right remote support equipments with them to start with. And people who didn't really have it, they quickly got onto it, and they were able to adapt to be able to support those remote assets. Yeah. So talking about remote supports, now we within IT service management suite of solutions, we have seen users, right? So IT service management is more with regards to delivering services and so on. Apart from just delivering services, what we also did have within the IT service management package was the option, or was the ability to be able to remotely support users without they having to spend extra for a remote support application. So apart from just, let's say, taking control and of course looking at what's happening and of course assisting users with the issues that they have, it's all about trying to ensure that what's running on those devices, trying to ensure that the devices are rightly patched, trying to ensure that there are no vulnerabilities, even though they are remotely, they're not connected to the company's infrastructure, right? So we, as organizations, what we did was we helped customers to use our IT service management tools, our endpoint device management tools, which actually did help them with sorting out all of these scenarios, even without they having to spend an extra dime. So these tools were actually meant to cope up with these challenges already. So we were able to scan those assets, though they are actually available in remote locations. We were able to patch them effectively. We were able to ensure that there are no vulnerabilities, and we were able to ensure that we send out the requirements. So for instance, if a user requires a new software to be installed, they didn't really have to come back to office, or they didn't know, IT professionals didn't really have to ship anything, they didn't really have to kind of ask the users to perform something to be able to deploy solutions themselves. Instead, these solutions that we already had, and of course, most of the organizations, they did really have some sort of a solution, like be it an endpoint device management solution or be it an IT service management solution, which did help them to achieve all these requirements. So acquiring the technology needed to support remote workers really was a positive outcome from the pandemic, yeah, for many organizations. So we saw almost 80% of the organization did really have some sort of a remote tool. But of course, this pandemic really did help them even increase the numbers, wherein now people started looking for technologies like the IT service management, remote support tools, endpoint device management tools, which can really help them manage those remote assets, remote users effectively. And that was really a positive outcome based on the pandemic for many organizations. So trying to look at the business view of IT, one of the other positive feedback, right, that we did really have was the survey found that almost 50% of the respondents thought IT has been better viewed and treated because of this pandemic. Yeah. And that was really a positive note. And of course, business looking at IT, and of course, end users appreciating IT professionals. Now, there was a huge process, or there was a huge, set of implementations that has to be done for businesses to be able to ensure that the end users does get what they're supposed to get, be it remote or be it in-house. So as part of teams, IT teams kind of now looked at the pandemic, and they had to reassess the traditional IT metrics. So earlier, they would kind of look at metrics based on the operational efficiency. Yeah, that's no longer the case anymore. Yeah, so IT teams had to reassess the IT metrics and move on from kind of measuring operational efficiency to better measuring business outcomes and end user experiences. So those were some of the key takeaways for IT personnel and of course businesses to ensure end users get the best experience from various different services that were offered by IT professionals. So talking about security and governance. In fact, based on the survey that we did, most respondents reported organizations actually could tackle the increased security and privacy concerns brought by the pandemic-induced remote work. And of course, the way they did tackle it was to deal with how they've implemented solutions for the right requirements that they had. So again, talking about the IT service management requirements. So people pre-pandemic did not really have a concept of, again, I'm not talking about the majority of the people, I'm talking about few, right? They did not really have the concept of handling security issues. They did not really have the concept of handling major incidents. They did not really have a critical rescue team or whatever in place to be able to support those outcomes. Yeah. So this pandemic really awakened those senses, and these tools gave them a better visibility of how they could actually handle those major incidents, how they could actually handle those security-related issues. So these tools need not just capture those issues. So when it comes to security, when it comes to privacy concerns, it's all about communications, correlations with various stakeholders, depending on the actual scenario, right? So these tools, now the IT service management tools, now did help them define workflows and automations. So as and when the tool finds out a major incident, or as and when the people working on the tool, the IT professionals working within the tool, finds out if there is a major incident, or if there is a security related issue, then the tool did actually do a lot of automation, a lot of back-end process without people having to do it manually, right? So we were able to send out communications. We were able to notify the right stakeholders at the right time. We were able to kind of engage with people and let them know the progress of a major incident happening. And we were able to let the users know that something has gone down, so that people don't really get panic in these scenarios. And of course, again, talking about people who did effectively manage these security and privacy concerns, it was more the largest organizations who already had tools in place, who already had process in place. If not, they were able to adapt to the process. If not, they were able to actually get the right tools to be able to handle these scenarios. And of course, the smallest organizations were able to ensure that they were able to actually tackle the increase in the security and privacy concerns during the pandemic-induced remote work. So all this meant the usage of personal devices, the apps, cloud services could potentially result in revenue loss, and of course, the penalties and so on. So what what they wanted was, there's kind of a need, like a pressing need for organizations to invest more in their security capabilities oriented towards hybrid work. So people, and as we saw earlier, more than half the person, or maybe even three-fifths of users are working in a hybrid nature. So that's become a pressing need for organizations to invest more in their security capabilities oriented towards hybrid work. So during this pandemic, we also saw how third-party services could actually help organizations. So obviously, we are talking about IT services, and when we talk about third-party services, people outsource their IT services to managed service providers like MSPs, right? And we have seen almost 75% of those organizations who did outsource their IT services to an MSP were really happy, and about one quarter were unhappy being their IT services being outsourced with an MSP. And of course, almost 10% of those users planned to actually bring in their outsourced services back in-house. And there are various reasons for it. Yeah, so obviously, outsourcing meant that they'll have to kind of depend on third-party resources, and of course, there is a charge for the managed service providers to assist users. And people, these 10% of the people realized that they've actually got enough resources. They've got enough now technology and skill sets for them to be able to start supporting users down the line, so that they didn't really have to depend on the MSPs for them to be able to support their services. Talking about technologies apart from just third-party services, based on a survey that we did, right? We found almost more than half the percentage, more than 50% of the organizations did not really have chatbots in operation, right? And of course, organizations that find IT service management ineffective are likely to use chatbots and find them unhelpful. So the largest organizations, the people who were to adapt chatbots, were the largest organizations, and they had a different scenarios, and they wanted to ensure that their users get the best experience in terms of trying to reach out to an IT personnel, and of course trying to ensure that the users are able to self-help themselves with regards to providing services, or maybe trying to fix an issue that they had. Just give me a minute. So these large organizations, they started to use chatbots as their front end. And we have seen, we ourselves have seen this, wherein customers started to use chatbot as their front end for various different business services that they offered. And they in fact wanted to have the chatbot as one of the omni-channel portal for the users to be able to kind of request for appropriate services. It need not be just IT, it could be anything, right? It could be facilities related services, it could be HR related services, it could be anything. but they just wanted, they wanted it to be really simple and effective, so that the users need not really jump between multiple different applications, for them to be able to get the appropriate services, for them to be able to report issues based on various different services. Instead, they wanted to have just a single conversational bot, which did provide assistance, which did provide intelligence, and of course help end users to get what they really needed. And these chatbots, though it was not used by most of the organizations, these large enterprises, they did quickly started to adapt to a concept of using chatbots, and of course artificial intelligence and so on. So the changed or delivered capabilities needed to be aligned with the wants and needs of business stakeholders. So what it really meant was, be it businesses trying to serve their end users better, whether it could be by providing in-house support, or it could be by providing, or it could be by outsourcing the services to an MSP, or it could be by simply adding and refining capabilities that are there as part of the self-service portals, or it just simply meant that they'll have to just introduce chatbots which can really enhance the end user experience. So if we look forward, so these are all going to be the impact of the prolonged pandemic on ITSM, right? So more automations will be used. Tools such as the IT service management, endpoint, device management, IT operations management, SIEM applications. So those are all different verticals. People would really want to invest in those applications to actually automate a lot of services that they have. End users now obviously are demanding today as we speak, and will be demanding as well. So we need to ensure that we define, and these IT service management, IT personals and professionals will focus on end users' productivity more and more down the line. So let's take a look at the summary, of what we have seen so far. So the key findings of the survey that we have done are these, right? For the most part, IT personnel have successfully adapted to the new landscape. Across the board, employees are better equipped. And of course, compared to the beginning of the pandemic, an additional 47% of the organizations are now providing mobile capable assets. IT teams see their value rise. And of course, more than 50% of the respondents think IT personnels are now viewed and treated better because of the pandemic. So just to conclude, though there are improvements that have been done, there's also room for improvement in many organizations. And we have seen this before. Almost 40% of the organizations still do not have BYOD policies in place. And that's really shocking. The user experience arguably falls short when we try and provide or define processes. we need to ensure there are more self-service capabilities so that the users doesn't really have to get in touch with IT professionals all the time. We need to ensure that people starts utilizing AI-driven chatbots, which could minimize and of course enhance the experience faced by the users. And of course, people should always be investing more in business continuity planning. Yeah. So that's all about today's session. We've also got the complete report in this link. So anyone who would like to go through the complete report, you're more than welcome to go through it. I'll be sharing the presentation with everyone who has joined today's session. So if at all, if you do have any questions, this is the time for those questions. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Thanks very much. That's really good.